I never thought my life would take such a sharp turn. My name is Daniel Foster, and at 47, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, temporarily paralyzed after a car accident that shook me to my core. It was a freak accident, really. One of those moments when life flips on you without warning. But the real blow didn't come from the accident. No, that came from Lauren, my wife of 18 years. Let me take you back to the moment that changed everything. I was lying there, hooked up to machines, with my entire body feeling like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I heard the sharp click of Lauren's heels before I saw her. At first, I felt relief. Finally, someone familiar, someone who'd comfort me through this nightmare. But her first words hit me harder than the accident ever could. "I can't afford to support a jobless person anymore. Get out," she snapped, arms crossed, looking at me as if I were a stain she wanted to scrub away. She didn't even sit down or ask how I was doing. There I was, unable to lift a finger, and she had already decided I was worthless to her. She wasn't even angry, just cold, calculated. She was done with me. I wanted to speak, to ask her how she could say such a thing when I was at my lowest, but my voice felt like it was stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. The woman I'd shared my dreams with, who I thought would stand by me no matter what, was walking out on me, literally, as if I were disposable. And then she said the kicker, the thing that made me realize just how far gone we were. "I've found someone who can actually take care of me." She didn't bother to name him, didn't even flinch as she declared it like she was trading in an old car for a newer model. With one last look, she turned and walked out of the hospital room without a shred of hesitation. I was stunned. Lauren had been unhappy with my job situation for a while, but to abandon me while I was lying there, paralyzed, hooked up to machines? That was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. And what hurt the most wasn't her leaving. It was the timing. She didn't leave when things were fine, or when we were arguing about my career. She left when I was at my most vulnerable. What Lauren didn't know, what made this moment almost darkly poetic, was that I'd just inherited $10 million. That's right, $10 million. The day before my accident, I'd received the official paperwork. My uncle, a man I deeply respected, had left me his fortune. He always admired my work ethic, even when I was struggling, and he believed in my potential. I hadn't told Lauren yet, wanting to surprise her with the news once I'd figured out how to share it. Funny how life works, isn't it? As I lay there replaying her words in my mind, I realized how wrong I'd been about Lauren. She didn't love me for who I was. She loved me for what I could do for her. And now that I was temporarily out of commission, I was no longer useful in her eyes. I should have been angry, but in that moment, all I felt was clarity. Lauren walking out wasn't the end of my life. It was the start of something new. I didn't need someone who only stuck around when things were easy. No, what I needed was freedom. From her, from the expectations, from everything that had held me back. For the rest of the day, I lay there in silence, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. It was like my entire marriage flashed before my eyes. The sacrifices I'd made, the times I'd prioritized her happiness over mine, the countless arguments about money, her career, my career. It all felt so distant now. It was as if Lauren walking out had flipped a switch in me. I was no longer the man who would beg for her approval or cling to a relationship that clearly wasn't built to last. When the nurse came in to check on me later that evening, I felt an odd sense of peace. The worst had already happened, and yet, I was still here. Still breathing. Still me. Lauren's abandonment wasn't going to break me. If anything, it gave me a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, a single thought kept circling in my mind. Lauren has no idea what she's walking away from. $10 million, gone from her grasp. And she wouldn't even know until it was too late. I smiled to myself, the first genuine smile I'd felt in what felt like years. Let her go. Let her build her life with someone else. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I never imagined my life would take this path, but looking back, the signs were always there. Let me take you back to the beginning, where it all started, where Lauren and I first became us. We met in college, a place where dreams felt limitless and love seemed as natural as breathing. Lauren was magnetic, the kind of woman who turned heads the moment she entered a room. I was drawn to her confidence and wit. Back then, she seemed like the type of partner who would stand by me no matter what, someone who believed in building a life together, brick by brick. And for a while, she was. After graduation, I secured my first job in finance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Lauren had just landed a job at a marketing firm, and together, we felt unstoppable. We rented a modest apartment, splitting our expenses, and even though money was tight, those were some of the happiest years of my life. We dreamed big, traveling the world, starting a family, building a future that felt uniquely ours. But as the years rolled on, the cracks began to show. My career hit a rough patch. Layoffs were rampant, and eventually, I found myself out of work. It was a tough time for me, one of the lowest points of my life, but I thought Lauren and I were a team. I thought she'd understand. At first, she did. She encouraged me to take my time, rebuild, and find something better. I threw myself into job hunting, picking up freelance gigs here and there to keep us afloat. But Lauren's patience wore thin. She didn't say it outright at first, but her tone shifted. Every small argument seemed to circle back to money, to what I wasn't doing, to what she believed I was failing to provide. "You're a smart guy, Michael," she'd say, the words cutting sharper than they seemed on the surface. "How hard can it be to get a decent job?" I worked tirelessly to bounce back, taking jobs I was overqualified for just to prove I was still trying. Eventually, I landed a mid-level position at a small company. It wasn't a dream job, but it was something. I thought things would get better. I thought Lauren would see my effort, see that I was doing my best. But it was never enough for her. Lauren started climbing the ranks at her firm, her confidence and ambition driving her forward. I admired her for that, at least, I did at first. But as her career soared, so did her dissatisfaction with me. She'd come home late, tired and irritable, tossing comments my way that felt more like jabs. "Do you even want more for yourself, Michael?" she'd ask, her voice laced with frustration. "It's like you're just content." Content. That word haunted me. I wasn't content, I was exhausted. But how could I explain that to her when she refused to see it? To Lauren, success was black and white. Either you were moving up, or you were falling behind. There was no in-between. For years, I tried to keep the peace. I took on more responsibilities at home, cooked her favorite meals, and listened patiently when she vented about her stressful days. I thought if I could just be the supportive husband she needed, things would improve. But with every effort, Lauren seemed to pull further away. She stopped smiling at my small gestures, stopped saying thank you. I became invisible in my own marriage, a shadow of the man I used to be. The woman who once held my hand and dreamed of a shared future now looked at me like I was a burden she couldn't wait to shed. I blamed myself for a long time. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. It wasn't until recently, after everything fell apart, that I realized the truth. Lauren wasn't frustrated because I had failed her. She was frustrated because I no longer fit the version of life she envisioned for herself. She wanted success, luxury, and status, and I was no longer the man who could provide those things. I think back to the years we spent together, and I wonder if Lauren ever truly saw me for who I was, or if I was just a stepping stone on her path to something better. The thought used to hurt, but now, it feels like clarity. You see, when she walked out of that hospital room, leaving me paralyzed and helpless, she thought she was walking away from a failure. What she didn't realize was that she was walking away from a man who had more strength and resilience than she ever gave him credit for. She also didn't know about the inheritance. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people reveal who they truly are when times get tough. Lauren showed me who she was that day in the hospital, and while it hurt to see the truth, it also set me free. Looking back, I can see how we drifted apart. I can see the moments where I should have spoken up, demanded better for myself, or walked away when the cracks became too deep to fix. But I stayed, hoping against hope that we could find our way back to each other. Now, I realized that staying wasn't the brave thing. It was the easy thing. Letting go, walking away, choosing to rebuild my life on my own terms. That's where real courage lies. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that timing is everything. Sometimes, It feels like the universe lines things up just to see how much irony you can stomach. Take my situation, for example. Just hours before my accident, I'd received a call that changed everything. It was the kind of call you dream about, the kind that makes you think your luck is finally turning. The voice on the other end belonged to my late uncle's lawyer. "Mr. Foster," he said, his tone calm but deliberate, "your uncle's estate has been finalized. He left you his entire fortune, $10 million. You're the sole beneficiary." I remember sitting there, holding the phone, stunned into silence. My uncle, Richard, was one of the few people in my life who genuinely believed in me. He'd built his fortune through sheer grit, starting as a small business owner and eventually growing an empire. While others saw me as a man who had fallen short, Uncle Richard saw potential. The lawyer continued, detailing the logistics of the inheritance. I was still processing the number, $10 million. For a moment, I thought about calling Lauren right then and there, sharing the news. Maybe this would fix things between us, I thought. Maybe the financial security would give her the reassurance she needed to see me differently. But something stopped me. A voice in my head whispered, "Wait, this wasn't just about money." If Lauren's love was tied to my bank account, was it really love? I wanted her to love me for who I was, not for what I could provide. So, I decided to wait. I told myself I'd surprise her after I had time to process everything. I wanted the moment to feel special, something we could share as partners. And then the accident happened. Lying in that hospital bed, paralyzed, hooked up to machines, I couldn't help but think about how quickly things had shifted. Just a day ago, I was imagining a future where Lauren and I could finally breathe easy, free from financial stress. Now, she was gone, walking out on me when I needed her the most. She didn't know about the inheritance. At first, I felt a pang of guilt. Should I have told her sooner? Would it have changed anything? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Her decision to leave wasn't about my accident or my temporary condition. It wasn't even about money. It was about the fact that, in her eyes, I was no longer useful. Lauren walking out had nothing to do with what I lacked, and everything to do with what she valued. That $10 million became more than just a financial windfall. It became a symbol of freedom. It was a reminder that I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone, least of all someone who couldn't see it for themselves. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, all the times I'd put her needs above my own, thinking that was what love required. I'd stayed in jobs I hated to keep us afloat. I'd bitten my tongue during arguments to keep the peace. I'd shouldered the weight of our struggles, believing it was my responsibility to make things work. But now, with this inheritance, I had a chance to rewrite the script. I didn't need Lauren's approval anymore. I didn't need to bend over backward trying to be the man she wanted me to be. For the first time in years, I could focus on what I wanted, on who I wanted to be. That realization was liberating. As I lay there in the hospital, I started to make plans. I wasn't sure what those plans looked like yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to waste this opportunity. I would honor my uncle's belief in me by building something meaningful, something that reflected the man I truly was. And Lauren? She'd already made her choice. When she walked out of that hospital room, she thought she was walking away from a burden. She didn't realize she was walking away from the opportunity of a lifetime. The thought made me smile. It wasn't a bitter smile, though. It was a smile of clarity, of acceptance. For so long, I'd let her define my worth, let her words and actions shape how I saw myself. But now, I had something she could never take away: freedom. Freedom to rebuild. Freedom to thrive. Freedom to live a life that wasn't tethered to someone else's expectations. I decided then and there that when the time came, I wouldn't hide my success out of spite or revenge. I'd move forward with grace, leaving the past behind. Lauren would learn the truth eventually, but not from me. And when she did, she'd realize what she lost. That realization would be hers to carry, not mine. The next day, I was still in the hospital, processing everything. Lauren's cruel words, the $10 million inheritance, and the freedom that lay just ahead of me. The morning had been quiet, save for the steady beeping of the machines hooked up to me. I'd grown used to the stillness, to the strange calm that comes after a storm. Then, I heard it, the sharp click of heels in the hallway. It was a sound I couldn't mistake. Lauren was back. My first thought was, why? Why would she come back after the cold dismissal she'd given me the day before? Maybe guilt had finally caught up to her. Maybe she'd realized that walking out on me while I was paralyzed wasn't exactly the action of a loving wife, or even a decent human being. But when she walked into the room, it wasn't just her. Behind her, a tall, polished man followed. He was younger than me, maybe in his late 30s, with the kind of confidence that made you feel like he thought the world owed him something. His tailored suit and perfectly combed hair screamed wealth and success, but his smirk told another story. He wasn't here to offer me sympathy or support. No, this was Lauren's upgrade. I stayed silent as they entered, watching as Lauren glanced at me with something between pity and disdain. She gestured toward the man like he was some kind of trophy. "Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with forced civility. "This is Nathan." Nathan stepped forward, extending a hand as if this were some kind of cordial introduction. "Nice to meet you," he said, his tone smug. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I met his gaze with a calm that surprised even me. "You'll have to forgive me," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not exactly in a position to shake hands right now." Nathan lowered his hand awkwardly, glancing at Lauren for guidance. She quickly jumped in. "We just wanted to come by and check on you," Lauren said, the insincerity in her voice almost laughable. "You know, see how you're holding up?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Yesterday, you seemed pretty clear about how little you cared." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Nathan spoke again. "Well," he said, trying to regain his composure, "Lauren told me about your situation. It's unfortunate, really. But, you know, life goes on. Life goes on." The audacity of it made me almost laugh. Here was this stranger, standing in my hospital room, acting like he was doing me a favor by showing up. I decided to let them dig their own hole. "So, what brings you here?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed, and when he glanced at the screen, his face went pale. He looked at me again, this time with a flicker of recognition. "Wait a second," he muttered, his voice dropping. "You're Daniel Foster?" I tilted my head slightly, curious now. "That's right. Why?" Nathan turned to Lauren, his face a mixture of shock and panic. "He's my CEO." The room went dead silent. Lauren's confident facade crumbled in an instant. Her eyes darted between Nathan and me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. You must be kidding," she stammered. "I'm not," Nathan said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I just started at his company 2 weeks ago. He's the owner." For a moment, I just sat there, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Lauren, who had abandoned me without a second thought, had married a man who worked for me. The irony was almost too much to bear. "Well," I said finally, breaking the silence, "it's a small world, isn't it?" Lauren's face was a storm of emotions. Confusion, anger, desperation. How is that possible?" she demanded. "You don't even have a job?" I smiled faintly. "You really think I'd tell you everything after the way you walked out on me?" Nathan looked like he wanted to disappear. "Lauren," he said quietly, "you didn't tell me he was your husband." "Ex-husband," Lauren snapped, though the words sounded less certain now. "Not yet," I corrected, my tone as calm as ever. "The papers aren't finalized." The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, Lauren looked genuinely unsettled. She had always been so sure of herself, so confident in her decisions. But now, faced with the reality of what she had walked away from, she didn't know what to do. I decided to take pity on her, for now. "If you don't mind," I said, "I'd like some time to rest. I'm sure Nathan has plenty of work to do, and I wouldn't want to keep you two from your busy lives." Nathan took the hint immediately. "Of course," he said, already backing toward the door. "Feel better, sir." Lauren hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she followed Nathan out, leaving me alone once again. As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about clarity. Lauren had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. And me? I had no intention of looking back. The silence in my hospital room was comforting after they left, but I couldn't shake the look on Lauren's face. Utter disbelief mixed with desperation. For years, she had seen me as nothing more than a man struggling to keep up, someone who had fallen behind the expectations she set for me. Now, in a twist of irony, she was married to a man who reported directly to me. I knew Lauren. She wasn't the type to let something like this go. Sure enough, the next day, she showed up at the hospital again, this time without Nathan. I was resting when the knock came at my door. Without waiting for an invitation, Lauren walked in, her expression a mix of frustration and something I hadn't seen in years, vulnerability. "Daniel," she started, her voice softer than I expected, "we need to talk." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting her stew in the awkward silence. She shifted uncomfortably, wringing her hands like she was unsure of how to approach me. This was a rare sight. Lauren, who always had an answer, always knew what to say, was at a loss for words. Finally, she blurted out, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" I asked, my tone as calm as ever. "About the company, about everything," she said, her voice growing sharper. "You let me think you were just coasting, that you had nothing going for you. How long have you been hiding this?" I couldn't help but smile. "Lauren, let me remind you of something. Yesterday, you walked out of this room and out of my life. You made it very clear that you didn't care about my struggles or my situation. So why does it matter now?" Her face turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. "That's not fair," she said. "You blindsided me." "Blindsided you?" I repeated, sitting up slightly despite the discomfort in my body. "Lauren, you didn't leave me because I wasn't successful. You left me because you didn't see value in me as a person. What I had or didn't have didn't matter. You were already done." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but the words seemed to die in her throat. She glanced at the floor, avoiding my eyes. I just thought. "You thought you were trading up," I finished for her. Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Don't make this about money, Daniel. I wanted stability, security. You weren't offering that. And yet," I said, leaning back against the pillows, "here you are, standing in front of the man you thought wasn't good enough, asking why I didn't tell you about my success. If it's not about money, then why does it matter now?" Lauren was silent for a long moment. Finally, she sighed and sat down in the chair next to my bed. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For years, I had waited for Lauren to acknowledge her part in our struggles, to admit that she had been just as flawed and imperfect as I was. But now, hearing her say it, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. "What do you want from me, Lauren?" I asked, my voice devoid of anger. An apology doesn't change what happened. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want us to try again." I felt a pang of sadness for the woman I had once loved, but I knew there was no going back. "Lauren," I said gently, "you made your choice, and I've made mine. We're not the same people we were when we started this journey. You didn't believe in me when it mattered most, and I can't forget that." "But Daniel," she started, reaching for my hand. I pulled my hand away. "No, Lauren. This isn't about hate or revenge. It's about moving on. You've already moved on, remember? Nathan? The man you brought into my hospital room yesterday?" Her face crumpled, and she let out a shaky breath. "Nathan's not what I thought he was," she admitted. "He's—" I held up a hand to stop her. "I don't need to know. Your relationship with Nathan is your business. But my life? That's mine now. You don't get to be a part of it anymore." The words were final, and Lauren knew it. She stood slowly, wiping at her eyes. For a moment, she lingered by the door, as if hoping I might change my mind. But I stayed silent, watching as she finally turned and walked away. When the door closed behind her, I let out a long breath. It hurt to see her like that, to see the cracks in the armor of the woman I had once loved so deeply. But I also felt a sense of closure. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from her expectations, her judgment, and the weight of trying to prove myself to someone who couldn't see my worth. As I stared at the ceiling, I realized something important. Lauren's regret didn't matter. What mattered was what I did next. Lauren's visit stirred something within me, a strange mix of clarity and finality. She had made her choice, and now she was grappling with the consequences. But my focus had shifted. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. And just as I was settling into this realization, the confrontation I knew was coming finally arrived. A week after her last visit, I got a call from my assistant. "Mr. Foster, there's a situation involving Nathan," she said cautiously. I wasn't surprised. It seemed Nathan had started to unravel, both personally and professionally, since our awkward encounter at the hospital. What I didn't expect, though, was for Nathan and Lauren to show up at my office the very next day. I was sitting in my corner office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was a far cry from the hospital bed where they'd last seen me. I'd since regained my mobility, and though I was still recovering, I felt stronger every day. The knock at the door came precisely at noon. When my assistant opened it, Lauren walked in first, followed closely by Nathan. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room as if trying to take in every detail. Nathan, on the other hand, looked visibly uncomfortable. His usual confidence had been replaced by a hesitant, almost sheepish demeanor. "Michael," Lauren began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us." I leaned back in my chair, studying them both for a moment before responding. I was curious to see what this meeting could possibly be about. "So, here we are. What can I do for you?" Lauren glanced at Nathan, who cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir," he began, addressing me formally, "I want to apologize for the misunderstanding at the hospital. I didn't realize who you were, and I let my personal life interfere with." I held up a hand to stop him. "Nathan, let's get one thing straight. What you do in your personal life is none of my business. Until it affects your work. And from what I've been hearing, it's starting to affect your work." Nathan's face turned red, and he nodded quickly. "I understand, sir. I take full responsibility for my actions." Lauren cut in then, her voice tinged with desperation. "Michael, I know this might be awkward, but Nathan didn't know about us. He didn't know you were your husband?" I interrupted, my tone calm but firm. "Ex-husband, Lauren. Let's not forget that detail." Her face flushed, but she pressed on. "I made a mistake, Michael. I see that now. Nathan and I—" "Lauren," I said, cutting her off again, "this isn't the place to air out your relationship issues. You're here in my office, not a therapist's chair. If you have something important to say, I suggest you get to the point." She hesitated, her confidence faltering. I wanted to apologize," she said finally, "for everything. For leaving you, for not believing in you. I didn't know. I didn't know what you were capable of." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "No, Lauren, you didn't. And that's exactly why this conversation is unnecessary. You made your choice when you walked out of that hospital room, and I've made mine. I'm moving on." Nathan shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly regretting his decision to accompany her. "Sir, if I may?" "You may not," I said, cutting him off with a sharp look. "This is between Lauren and me." I turned back to Lauren, who was now visibly holding back tears. "You didn't just leave me, Lauren. You abandoned me when I needed you most. And you didn't do it quietly, you made sure to tear me down on your way out. So forgive me if I don't accept your apology with open arms." She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand to stop her. "This isn't about hate or bitterness. It's about boundaries. I've found peace in my life, and I won't let you disrupt that. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." Lauren looked down, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Nathan, sensing the tension, took a step forward. "Sir, Nathan," I said, my tone sharper now, "you're on thin ice. Your behavior outside this office is your business, but the moment it affects your performance here, it becomes mine. Consider this your one warning. Understood?" Yes, sir, he said quickly, his face pale. I stood then, signaling that the meeting was over. I think we're done here. Lauren, Nathan, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But it won't be here. They both stood, Lauren hesitating for a moment, as if she wanted to say something else. But the look on my face must have told her it was futile. She turned and walked out, Nathan following close behind. As the door closed behind them, I sat back down and let out a long breath. Confronting Lauren and Nathan wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to make it clear, to them and to myself, that my life was no longer tied to theirs. I had bigger things to focus on. I knew the confrontation wouldn't be the end of it. People like Nathan and Lauren rarely fade away quietly. Still, I had no idea just how quickly the consequences of their actions would begin to catch up with them. Nathan's professional unraveling started almost immediately after our meeting. The day after they left my office, my assistant forwarded me an email from one of Nathan's team leads. It was a formal complaint outlining how Nathan's personal life was interfering with his work. Missed deadlines, sloppy presentations, unprofessional behavior during meetings. It seemed the man who once strutted into my hospital room with smug confidence was beginning to crack under pressure. I didn't intervene right away. Instead, I decided to let the situation play out naturally. I wanted to see if Nathan would step up, take responsibility, and turn things around. Unfortunately for him, he didn't. Over the next few weeks, the complaints piled up. His coworkers grew increasingly frustrated, and his once promising reputation within the company began to crumble. The final straw came during a high-stakes client presentation. Nathan showed up late, unprepared, and visibly flustered. His excuses were as hollow as his performance, and the client wasn't impressed. After the meeting, my assistant informed me that Nathan had been seen arguing with Lauren in the parking lot earlier that day. Apparently, their picture-perfect relationship wasn't holding up under the weight of their poor decisions. I decided it was time to step in, call Nathan into my office, I told my assistant. A few minutes later, he walked in, looking far less polished than the first time I'd met him. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was a shadow of the man who had once stood beside Lauren with smug arrogance. "Sit," I said, motioning to the chair across from my desk. He obeyed, his posture slouched, his confidence completely eroded. "Nathan," I began, "I've been keeping an eye on your performance these past few weeks. It's clear to me, and to your team, that you're struggling. Care to explain why?" He hesitated, glancing down at his hands. I've been dealing with some personal issues," he admitted finally. "Personal issues?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do you think our clients care about your personal issues? Do you think your team appreciates picking up your slack because you can't separate your personal life from your professional responsibilities?" He flinched at my words, but I didn't let up. "Nathan, when you walked into this company, you had potential. I saw it. That's why I approved your hiring. But potential means nothing without discipline. Right now, you're not just failing yourself, you're failing this company. And that's unacceptable." He looked up at me then, his eyes desperate. "Please, sir, I can fix this. Just give me another chance." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Fix it how, Nathan?" "By continuing to let your personal drama spill over into the workplace? By dragging this company's reputation down with your poor decisions?" "I'll do better," he promised, his voice trembling. "I swear." I stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "You're on probation," I said. "Effective immediately. You'll report directly to your team lead, and your performance will be closely monitored. If I see even one more misstep, you're out. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," he said quickly, nodding. "Good. Now get out of my office and start cleaning up the mess you've made." He stood, mumbling a thank you before hurrying out the door. As I watched him leave, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to cut him loose right then and there, but another part of me recognized that everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Whether Nathan would take this opportunity or squander it was up to him. Meanwhile, Lauren's own downfall was unfolding in parallel. My assistant informed me that she had shown up at the office multiple times, trying to see Nathan. It seemed their relationship was quickly deteriorating, with Lauren desperate to regain some semblance of control. But as much as she tried, it was clear that her actions were catching up with her, too. Nathan's struggles at work mirrored the cracks in their personal life, and it was only a matter of time before the entire facade came crashing down. I didn't take pleasure in their suffering, but I couldn't deny the poetic justice of it all. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need to chase revenge or dwell on the past. I had a life to rebuild, and that was where my focus would remain. If there's one thing I've learned from life, it's that storms don't last forever. When Lauren and Nathan walked out of my life, or, more accurately, when I chose to shut the door behind them, it marked the beginning of a new chapter for me. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I started by focusing on myself. My recovery from the accident became my top priority. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, but every small victory, a stronger grip, a steadier step, felt like a triumph. I was determined not just to regain what I had lost, but to become stronger than ever. The $10 million inheritance gave me the freedom to make decisions that weren't driven by fear or desperation. For years, I had lived paycheck to paycheck, constantly worrying about how to make ends meet. Now, with that financial safety net, I could finally think long-term. But I didn't want to become complacent. Money might solve some problems, but it couldn't replace the sense of purpose I'd always found in my work. So, I turned my attention back to the company. The truth was, I had built my career on resilience. When I took over my uncle's business years ago, it wasn't the thriving empire it was today. It had been struggling, much like I had been, and it took everything I had to turn it around. Now, as CEO, I was determined to make it even better. I started by addressing the cracks I had noticed during Nathan's tenure. His unprofessional behavior had exposed weak points in the team structure, and I wasn't about to let those issues fester. I held meetings with department heads, listened to their concerns, and implemented changes to improve efficiency and morale. But my rise wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about growth. I wanted to take the company to new heights, to create opportunities not just for myself but for everyone who worked alongside me. I started exploring new ventures, investing in innovative ideas, and expanding into untapped markets. Every decision I made felt like a step forward, a reminder that I was capable of more than Lauren had ever believed. Outside of work, I began to focus on building a life that felt fulfilling. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the chaos of my marriage. I started traveling, exploring the world in ways I had always dreamed of but never had the chance to pursue. And then there was charity. One of the first things I did with the inheritance was establish a foundation in my uncle's name. He had always believed in giving back, and I wanted to honor his legacy. The foundation focused on providing scholarships to underprivileged students and supporting small businesses in struggling communities. Giving back became one of the most rewarding parts of my new life. It reminded me that success wasn't just about what you achieved for yourself. It was about how you used that success to uplift others. Through it all, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by gratitude for the lessons I had learned. Lauren and Nathan's betrayal had hurt, yes, but it had also pushed me to rediscover my strength. I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. Not to Lauren, not to Nathan, not even to myself. I was living my life on my terms, free from the shadows of their judgments. One day, as I sat in my office overlooking the city, I realized something profound. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was creating something entirely new. For so long, I had been defined by my struggles, by the weight of other people's expectations. Now, I was defined by my choices, my resilience, and my determination to live authentically. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly excited about the future. As I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun set over the skyline, I couldn't help but smile. This was my moment, my rise, and I wasn't about to let anything, or anyone, take it away from me. The dust had finally settled. Lauren and Nathan were out of my life, and the chaos they'd brought with them had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I was free from the expectations, the judgments, and the constant feeling of never being enough. What lay ahead wasn't just a continuation of my life. It was the beginning of something entirely new. I sold the house Lauren and I had shared. It held too many memories of a life that no longer existed, and I wasn't interested in carrying that baggage with me. Instead, I moved into a sleek apartment overlooking the city, a space that felt modern, fresh, and entirely mine. The quiet solitude of my new home was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd endured, and I found peace in its simplicity. With my company thriving, my personal life began to bloom in ways I hadn't expected. I reconnected with Julia, a longtime friend who had always been a grounding presence in my life. She was the kind of person who saw people for who they were, not for what they could offer her, a rarity, as I'd learned the hard way. Julia had been there for me during the darkest moments, quietly supporting me while I picked up the pieces of my life. Our friendship deepened in those months, and before long, she became an integral part of my new chapter. Together, we spent weekends exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, and even attending cooking classes, something I'd never imagined myself doing but found surprisingly enjoyable. I also leaned further into my philanthropic efforts. The foundation I'd started in my uncle's name grew rapidly, becoming a beacon of hope for those it supported. I found purpose in giving back, in using my resources to create opportunities for others. Every scholarship awarded, every small business funded, felt like a victory, not just for them, but for me as well. Lauren, meanwhile, wasn't faring as well. Word eventually got back to me through mutual acquaintances that her relationship with Nathan had imploded. His probation at work had turned into a termination after yet another misstep, and without his income to support their lifestyle, Lauren had been forced to make some drastic changes. She'd moved back to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, her once lavish dreams reduced to mere survival. I felt no joy in hearing about her struggles. In fact, I barely thought about her at all. My life had moved forward, and she was a distant memory. A cautionary tale of what happens when you let greed and ambition cloud your judgment. Julia and I eventually decided to partner on a new venture, combining her passion for art with my business acumen. Together, we opened a gallery and cafe in a picturesque part of the countryside. It became a haven for creatives and food lovers alike, a space filled with laughter, warmth, and community. The gallery became a symbol of everything I had learned: the importance of resilience, the value of genuine connections, and the beauty of creating something meaningful. Julia and I worked side by side, building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on the patio of the gallery, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal I'd faced had once felt like an ending, a devastating blow I wasn't sure I could recover from. But it hadn't been the end. It had been a beginning, a push I hadn't realized I needed to step into the life I was always meant to live. Julia turned to me, her eyes sparkling with the warmth that had become so familiar. "You look like you're deep in thought," she said, smiling. "Just thinking about how far we've come," I replied. "And where we're going," she added, her smile widening. She was right. This wasn't the end of the road. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities. Looking back, I realized that the hardest moments of my life had taught me the most valuable lessons: the importance of self-worth, the strength found in resilience, and the beauty of living authentically. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And as I sat there, surrounded by the life I had built, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Because in the end, the storm that had once threatened to destroy me had only made me stronger. And now, the future was mine for the taking.